headline is he got released, and that's a headline for him. He's been, as you say, the longest held guy. I think it dates to March 8th. That's a week before the whole Abrego Garcia mess. While he's been in jail, they first tried in front of this judge in New Jersey, Judge Fabriars, this very kind of almost sinister Orwellian power. The judge said, that's just too much discretion to give the Secretary of State no reasons. I strike that down.
The Trump administration thought they had it all figured out until a judge delivered a knockout punch that left them scrambling. This courtroom drama is one for the history books, and the details are simply unbelievable. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now, back to the video. What could a young Columbia University student possibly do to end up in ICE detention? Did he sneak in nuclear secrets? Steal the crown jewels? Nope. Mahmoud Khalil's crime appears to be existing. That's the kind of threat we're talking about here. Khalil wasn't just any random student trying to get by. He was exactly the kind of person you'd expect to see at an Ivy League school. Ambitious, dedicated, with big dreams and a baby on the way. But for ICE, that apparently raised some red flags.
Something to do with not being fully forthcoming about some of the work he had done in the Middle East. So that's still the fight they're having, but it's sort of safety net, a backup assertion that he was not fully candid or he somehow falsified his entry papers when he came to the States. I don't see him as a flight risk, but he said something else, which is your now assertion of trying to deport him because of falsification of his entry papers is quote.
And their case against him, well, it had more holes than Swiss cheese on a hot day. The story begins simply enough. Khalil came to the US on a student visa, ready to establish a better future alongside his pregnant wife. Then, boom, life threw him a curveball he couldn't dodge. ICE officials claimed that Khalil had falsified his immigration paperwork. Seems specific, right? Except their evidence barely held water. Suddenly, this guy who should have been working on term papers found himself in a detention facility instead. And here's where it gets worse. He didn't even get to see the birth of his child. Let that sink in for a moment. Someone decided it was okay to rip a soon-to-be father out of his family's life over allegations shakier than Trump trying to dodge subpoenas. Now let's talk about the detention process itself, because detention might conjure up some white-collar image of waiting in an air-conditioned office on a comfy chair. Yeah, no. For Khalil, it was a months-long nightmare. He was thrown into a system notorious for its inhumane conditions, while his wife dealt with the stress of childbirth alone. And while she held their newborn for the first time, Khalil sat in a facility where dignity goes to die, wondering if he'd ever go home. The emotional toll that took on his family? You can't even put a number on it. But what's stunning is how this seemed less about justice and more about sending some kind of message.
So what the judge is really suggesting is, you, United States, having lost this first point, are now just trying, as they do all the time. Now they'll go to trial, and the United States will say, "You falsified your documents. We can get rid of you." And he says two things. One, I didn't. And we have to see the papers and see where the argument is. Because you know this, Ben, generally in the law, you're not able to say, well, you never do this. Now, why are you picking on me? Typically, the courts will say, you know, that's the way it goes. You can't complain that other people it wasn't enforced on. But
because let's face it, targeting a student at Columbia doesn't scream proper prioritization on ICE's part. Legal experts were quick to call out the flimsy case. Harry Littman, former U.S. attorney and legal analyst, described it as textbook overreach by the Trump administration. In his words, cases like Khalil's reek of political theater disguised as law enforcement. Think about it. Why burn taxpayer money locking up a student over paperwork that no one could definitively prove was fake? The theory floating around is that people like Khalil, highly educated immigrants who visibly succeed in American institutions, don't fit into the caricature that certain politicians like to paint when they talk about immigration. So instead of applauding him for achieving something millions of Americans still dream about, ICE turned him into public enemy number one. The irony? Khalil wasn't hiding or evading evading authorities. He was following the system step by step and still got blindsided. But here's the kicker. This wasn't just some bureaucratic mishap where someone forgot to dot an I or cross a T. No, it felt deliberate. Khalil's detention quietly coincided with a larger trend under Trump's administration of throwing legal doubt and red tape at immigrants who had done everything right.
This judge, anyway, seems ready to say, why can't you? Because it's a pretext, because you're lying, administration. You really want to do it for another reason. That's why it matters that you never do it here.
Pretext, pretext, pretext. We're going to be hearing that a lot as you and I now analyze a lot of these cases where the Trump regime has targeted high-profile people.
So that, I think, is the fight that's going to be happening. It could take a while, as these things tend to do. And the big point is, while it takes a while, he's now at liberty. He's back with his family.
And brutal as it sounds, the priority wasn't accuracy. It was high-profile removals that could make flashy headlines. It made you wonder, did they go after Khalil because he was truly suspicious? Or was this just another round of the administration flexing its muscle, even if that meant breaking families apart? If Khalil's case smelled bad already, it downright stunk when it wound up in court. This is where things started to shift. Enter one federal judge who was clearly not in the mood for nonsense. The judge dismantled ICE's argument with surgical precision, pointing out that their allegations were borderline absurd. This wasn't just a ruling, it was a takedown, and boy, was that satisfying. The court ruled that Khalil be released immediately, suggesting the government's case against him was weak, to put it politely. Or, if you want to be less polite, blatantly bogus. Now, this decision wasn't just a win for Khalil and his family. It was a humiliation for the administration. To ICE, and by extension the Trump-era immigration crackdown, the judge's ruling didn't just say wrong move, but practically screamed it. And considering how much this administration doubled down on their hardline immigration policies, a victory like Khalil's wasn't just rare, it was a gut punch to the system. But let's not congratulate ICE for accidentally allowing justice to prevail. That was the judge's doing, and not some magical redemption arc. Still, the bigger takeaway here is what this case says about the power dynamics at play during Trump's presidency. By targeting someone like Khalil, the administration wasn't just enforcing policies, they were testing boundaries. But what they didn't count on was running into a judge who, for lack of a better phrase, wasn't having it. Khalil walked free, but what happened to him shines a harsh light on how these sweeping immigration strategies weren't just cruel, they often collapsed under the weight of their own incompetence. Which brings us to the million-dollar question: how far could this game of legal chicken go? For Khalil, justice came through, but as we'll see, his case is part of a much larger pattern. You'd think leaders would learn by now not to lean too heavily on stunts that blow up in their faces, but hey, some people just insist on learning things the hard way. Khalil's release wasn't just a win for him, it was proof that even Trump's administration couldn't bulldoze over justice every time. Think about it, they had all the resources, all the power, and yet a single judge with a spine called their bluff. It's a reminder that the system, bruised as it may seem, still has moments where it works. Justice isn't a luxury reserved for the wealthy or powerful. It's meant for everyone, even those up against giants. With cases like Khalil's, the judiciary proves it can still slam the brakes on executive overreach, and honestly, that's worth celebrating.